All right, let's get this party started. It's a little squeak. All right, hello everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining this session. Call out the elephant in the room that I know this is the first session after lunch. So depending on kind of what and how much you ate, I'm hoping to keep this somewhat lively to hope that people don't. You got coffee? All right, make sure you guys get some coffee. I don't want to see anyone falling asleep. I'll take that offensive. So appreciate you all joining this talk. So my name is Aaron Wilkerson. I'm the Senior Manager of Data Strategy and Governance over at Carhartt. So appreciate you all joining this. Have a couple slides and kind of topics that I think are important to me to talk through. Of course, like any slide, anytime you want to stop and ask a question, feel free to. Typically try to have these as informal as we can, just to kind of exchange ideas, exchange dialogue. So please feel free to stop me, ask any questions, or clarify anything so we can get started. So what I plan to talk about is kind of show some things about me, talk about some challenges that I see that I think we're facing in the data industry, kind of show my own personal connection of strategy and value from a personal lens, talking about business value, things I've observed from a strategy perspective, and then things I've observed from a governance perspective, and then kind of thinking about where do you start if people are interested in kind of what to do there. So about me. So this is a picture of me and my family. You notice that is 5 children, so been a little bit busy the past couple years. You got 5? Awesome. So the oldest is going to be 12 on Saturday. The youngest is about to be 6 years old, so a very nice, tight, close in age group. No twins, so one at a time. By the time we had the 5th kid, I finally figured out where babies came from. So, so we stopped at that point. All of them are in school right now, so very cool to work remote and have all the kids in school. So a nice quiet period from 8 to 3:30, and then it all falls apart when they get home from school. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I found that in my space, my kids have been a very cool way for me to learn about my own industries. When I think about strategy, I think about my daughter. I'll share that story in a second. When I think about governance, I have some stories from my own son. So it's kind of cool how I've learned through parenting just how to connect these kind of these ideas around strategy, governance, and parenting, and these things kind of all connect together. So a little about me and my family. So this is my uncomfortable slide. So I have 2 of these in presentations. So we're facing some pretty huge headwinds in data space. On the left there, you'll see that those are some pretty sobering statistics from Gartner. This is from a couple years ago, but I think that number is still relatively valid, where 85% of big data projects fail. That's not to say that we're not doing things. Like I think in our industry, we're doing cool projects, we're doing a lot of stuff, but for some reason, the business is not seeing the value in that, and it's not really connecting. And the second part of that is from Gartner 2, from a different study, that less than half of data and analytics teams effectively provide value to the organization. So less than half of what we're doing in our teams, the business is seeing the value in this. So that's another problem where, like I said, we have all these teams, we're doing a lot of cool stuff, but the business is not seeing the value. And this is across the board. You can look at Gartner, you can look at McKinsey, all these different publications and research firms are finding the exact same thing. And on the right here, from a career perspective, something similar where, any of you ever heard this before, like you need to be more strategic? That's something I faced before. Like a couple years ago, I thought I was up for promotion. Things were looking well, and they said, well, Aaron, we need you to be more strategic. And I said, what the heck does that mean? And the boss couldn't tell me. He was like, yeah, I can tell you what strategy is not, but they really couldn't tell me what strategy was. So even when we talk about value, there's a huge connection there to strategy where in order for a lot of us to progress our careers and for our, personally, career perspective, even our teams, there's really this huge thing about being more strategic that I think that we're facing also as an industry where the business doesn't really see us as strategic partners, or we're being left out of certain conversations because we're not really talking to them in the language of strategy and value, which I want to talk about a little bit today. So, personal. So the picture at the bottom there is of my daughter. So one of the ways that I really connected to strategy was kind of a uncomfortable experience, but she ended up having to go to the hospital February last year. So she had a bunch of fevers. We went to our doctor, and the doctor told us we had to go to C.S. Mott's Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor. So we spent a nice 7 days in the hospital dealing with a urinary tract infection that spread to her kidneys. The first couple of days, if you're in the hospital, you're getting treatment. It's kind of a cyclical thing where they come in, they take her temperature, they give her some antibiotics, they leave, they come back. So for the first couple of days, we're kind of just, we're there. Mind you, this is also during COVID, and our family did have COVID the month before, so they were very, protective of the staff there. So whenever they walked in our room, they put in the full hazmat suits. So they had to kind of, put the suits on. They walked in the room. So that was also a challenge where anytime the doctors were talking, they were talking outside the room. So my wife and I were in the room with our daughters trying to figure out what's going on. So by day 4 is when my wife and I kind of had, we were tired, we were cranky, we wanted to get the heck out of the hospital. So we went to the doctor and we said, we don't see this getting any better. We've been here for 4 days. She's still having these fevers. We know you've given us antibiotics, but we're still here. What the heck's going on? And then I think the doctor kind of realized there was just a huge failure of communication because they said, we've been looking at her meds every day. We've been looking at her temperatures every single day. We've been having all these conversations, and she's tracking okay, and we know what's going on. But the problem was they weren't communicating that to us. So we're kind of sitting there what the heck's going on? But there's a whole entire conversation going on outside the room where they're kind of talking about her care and kind of what's going on. But there was missing that connection around kind of what we valued of we're trying to get our daughter well, stop having fevers, give her the infection so that we can get the heck out of here. And they're kind of just kind of doing things, kind of running the business. So that was a huge turning point where we kind of verbally said something needs to change because, we can just leave and take her out here and go somewhere else. And also, I think the COVID thing was a big impact because they had to wear the full hazmat suit. So they didn't want to have to get, suited up every time they came in there. So they were doing things outside. So luckily, we had COVID a month before, so they ended up stopping wearing the suit. So after that, for the next couple of days, they came in the room. And I don't know if you guys ever seen doctors do rounds, but it's actually an interesting thing where they walk in the room, they actually do a full presentation. Julia Wilkerson, age 5, came in here because of fevers, 105-degree temperature. The next course of action is we give antibiotics. Those are working. So that was kind of one of those huge kind of light bulbs around that's actually strategy. And it's an interesting way to communicate around we're all on the same page around what the treatment is and what's going on. Because I think a lot of cases, we talk in our own teams, but sometimes there's a missing connection to the business where we're not really telling them hey, this is what's going on, these are the next steps, this is the course of action, and talking in language where we can all be on the same page. So I think that was an experience, like I said, an uncomfortable experience, but it's one of the first times that we're really kind of connected how to talk about strategy and even how to think about it in terms of here's the problems, here's how we're going to solve it, and here's the next steps. Because ultimately, we were trying to make sure that she was going to, stop having fevers, infections cleared, and we can go home. So if they talked to me about some new cutting-edge MRI technique, I would have said, I really don't care about that. I only care about getting her well so we can leave. So that was another thing where I noticed is that they're very methodical about telling us, we're going to focus on this treatment. We're not going to do these other treatments. So my wife was big on WebMD, where she would say, on WebMD, it says you can do this or this, and she might have that at that. And it was, we understand that, but we're here talking about this. We're not talking about these other things. So that was one of those kind of examples where really kind of being a parent kind of connected me to strategy to really understand we're here to solve a very specific problem that your daughter has, and we're here to only talk about that and how we're going to solve that. So I think that's one of the things I've noticed just in our industry where I think if we got better about talking about specifically the problems the business faces and solving that versus hey, we got cloud, we got AI, chat GPT, all this stuff, the business kind of doesn't care. So when we talk about understanding business value, a lot of what I'm talking about are really questions, because I think kind of engaging in questions is how you really get out of the business value. So I think it's easy to talk about requirements, but I think there's core questions that I found that should be asked. And even thinking about the previous example around ultimately to our business stakeholders, what do you care about? What's important to you? Based off that, what decisions do you have to make, and how are you incentivized? So me as a parent, I care about my daughter being well. I care about the fevers going away. I care about an infection clearing up. That's what I care about. Why is it important? Because I think I'm a good parent, so I think that I should care about that. What decisions do you have to make? The decisions I have to make is either I have to go to the hospital. I need to be in this hospital versus that hospital. I chose CS Motts because I heard this is one of the best hospitals versus taking her to a different hospital. How am I incentivized? Hugs and kisses. I don't know. That's some different examples. So thinking about that with our business stakeholders is when we're talking with them, These are actual questions to ask in terms of, okay, as a business, as a process owner, what do you care about? I care about, maintaining inventory. Why is it important? Because that's how my performance engage, or if we don't do this process right, our business can't ship product to our customers. What decisions do you have to make? So based off that, I have to make sure that we effectively communicate with our warehouse, to our different different stakeholders. So how are you incentivized? This is a big one from a CRM perspective. So a lot of people talk about like Salesforce CRM and how people aren't using it. That's because most likely those people aren't incentivized. So we talk about our sales staff. Their compensation is based on sales and driving sales. Compensation is not based on like keeping data up in Salesforce and making sure they complete 100% of their record. So understanding these questions is really the first kind of ways to talk about business value and figure out what's important to people. So we go back to the strategy perspective and linking it. Our strategy should be based off of the answers we get here, not what we think is important, it's what the business thinks is important. And then given these questions, how do we provide value? So based off what our teams are built to do, how do we position our teams to address these questions that are being asked of our business stakeholders? And this is a constant feedback loop where we're always talking about this. This is not a once-a-year kind of strategy session or discussion. These are conversations that we're having weekly, monthly, quarterly, however often we want to have these discussions. These are some core questions that we should be asking of our stakeholders. And then at a higher level, I think these are kind of some questions I think we should ask of ourselves is, do we know how our organization creates value? Like, why does our business exist? Who are our customers? What do we do? Do we know how our organization makes money? That's a very hard one that if you talk to most people, they have no clue how the organization makes money. Like, how do we sell our products? Where do we sell our products? What's our price points? Like, these are also those questions, because if you talk to CEOs or like senior executives, they know that, and that's what they care about, because that's where their stakeholders are talking about. That's what they're talking about with the board, is how their company makes money. And then the operating model. So given 1 and 2, how does the business actually function? Like, do you have planning? Do you have supply chain? Like, is the business architected to deliver value and to make money? And do we understand that? So this is another one of those things around, if you're trying to connect these concepts, we really need to learn about these things and know it from ourselves and know it from our stakeholders. Because once you understand that, this is the whole thing about business literacy and understanding how the business functions, because this is what our business thinks about every day. I know we think about like queries and reporting and dashboards and our warehousing and cloud. The business thinks about creating value, shipping product, making money. So our ability to understand that and communicate that with them is our ability to be more effective in delivering value for our different organizations. This is another interesting one. So I found this from I think it was called like Conference Board. So they did a survey of different CEOs. And kind of what they care about. So this is about like February of March of last year. So on the left shows external impacts. So this is kind of things you can't control versus can't control. So on the left is things that you can't control, and the right things you can control. So on the left, this is also when I think about value, is understanding kind of these helps us have better conversation with our business stakeholders. So if you look on the left, like these are the things that keep CEOs up at night. So economic downturn recessions, inflation, COVID, wars, supply chain. So our ability to so when we watch the news or read the news, when we see certain things, the difference is that our CEOs and senior leaders are thinking about these things where we may not be. So we don't need to think about these things every day, but it's one of the things that we should be aware of, because this is kind of talking about how do we deliver value. It's understanding these concepts. On the right, this is internal things that the business can control. So how do we attract and retain talent? How do we drive revenue growth? Do we need to modify our business model? I mean, during COVID, a lot of businesses had to pivot and switch their business model in order just to stay alive. Drive profit growth, accelerate digital transformation. So the reason why we think about this or care about this, because it goes back to the value component of our ability to understand these concepts and speak to the business in these concepts makes us relevant. It makes sure that we're strategic partners, and it gets us in the room to have these discussions. Because sometimes we're not included in the room, because at one point we were in the room, we were talking about solutions, we were talking about data, we were talking about, like I said, cloud modernization, and we were talking about these topics, but the business is like, that's great, but we don't, like, this is what we're thinking about. So our ability to connect strategy on the data side to the business is our ability to talk coherently about these different concerns that the business has. So strategy simplified. So like I said, I went on a years-long journey to figure out strategy. So these are kind of 5 different definitions. I mean, strategy has different definitions based off of who you talk to. These are 5 that I've come across that really resonated with me because, like I said, when we talk to different people, they define strategy different ways. So everyone has their own personal favorites or what makes sense to them. But the goal is that at the bottom, right? So at the end of the day, we're trying to either achieve top line growth, so revenue, expansion of the bottom line, control expenses, control costs or something like that, or reduction of risk. So strategy should allow us to do the bottom one of those different three at the bottom. So I find this interesting just for me because it allows me to think about it. So there's different ways we can talk about strategy, but at the end of the day, it's really about solving problems, focus, so we're allocating resources to a very specific problem, and we're saying yes to one thing and no to another thing. So if you go in a room and talk about strategy and everyone's happy, something's wrong. Like at the end of the day, you should be focused on one thing and not focus on the other thing where someone's not happy, but they're not happy because they want you to focus on their thing. But actually it's we only have X amount of resources, so we're focused on this. And we're focused on this because the business cares about this, the business cares about revenue growth, the CEO cares about this. So it's connection of the things the business cares about and solving problems so that we can achieve one of the bottom business outcomes. So here's an example. So what's interesting is that a lot of the public companies, they do their quarterly earnings, and all those quarterly earnings are available to read. So sometimes I nerdily look at quarterly earnings statements because it allows you to think about, to be more strategic because you hear about how the business thinks about things. So this is kind of some quotes from the CEO of Nike. What's interesting here you'll see is that he talks about revenue growth. So you see here the mention of revenue growth of 14%. You see here about double-digit increases in traffic. So you can think about from a strategy perspective, their growth was achieved by increases in traffic on mobile apps. They also talk about the wholesale channel. They talk about inventory. So if you're thinking about how do I be more strategic, what the business cares about, or if you think about how to have a conversation. So if you're talking with someone in the business about what they think is important, sometimes they already gave you the answers. Like if you look at like Q3, Q2, Q1, they've given you the answers around what they think is important because this is the CEO talking to the shareholders and the board because those are the people who keep the CEO hired. If you're not satisfying some of those folks there, the CEO is out. So he's talking to you or he or she is talking to you about what they find is important. So it goes back to the same thing around value. What they find is valuable is what they are talking about in these conversations. So our ability as data professionals to talk in these different concepts is our ability to be relevant and mapping back to the strategy to provide value. So if you see here, revenue growth is very valuable. So our ability to connect what we do to these different ideas makes us more valuable, and it solves the original first slide around less than 0.5% is driving value, 85% are failures. That's probably because they're doing nothing relevant to what the CEO of the business cares about. Just kind of a quick plug here. So this is a concept I've seen before too, is called good strategy versus bad strategy, which I've seen a lot of bad strategy in my day. I've done a lot of bad strategies because I didn't understand this. But at the end of the day, strategy should solve a problem. So there's a problem or a challenge you're trying to solve. There's a guiding policy. So going back to my daughter, the problem was she had 105-degree fevers. We would give her medicine. It would go down. It would go right back up. So the problem of the fevers, the policy was we're going to give her X, Y, and Z antibiotics with some fancy name. The coherent next steps are we're going to give her the antibiotics every 4 hours until they kick in and they work. So problems, this is what we're going to do, and this is the next steps we're going to do. So really that's strategy in a nutshell. Like it should be a problem. So this is also what we're trying to solve. So once you understand just what the business is trying to do or the value, these are the strategies create. So what strategy is not is goals and targets, project list. So if someone said this is our strategy and it's a list of projects, the question, of course, is what problems are we trying to solve and what is the business benefit of what we're doing here? If they can't answer that, it is not a coherent strategy. Or vision, hopes, and dreams. So someone says, hey, we want to be the #1 leader in our market in this category. That's not a strategy. That's a goal. It's a vision, or it's a pipe dream. It's like, how are we going to get there? We're going to get there by increasing, increasing marketing spend. We're going to target this demographic. Like you're actually trying to solve a problem versus just saying we want to be #1. We want to be, top, blah, blah, blah. Like getting to good strategy allows us to actually be connected to our different business goals and outcomes. This is kind of an example of something I put together. Note, I've only been at Carhartt for 7 months, so this is not specific to Carhartt because I haven't been there long enough to talk about this. But this is an example of something I put together. If you read this, you kind of go left to right in terms of how do we think about actually putting together different strategies. So this is the previous company I was at. So we were trying to drive revenue growth. So at the top, like current state, they were achieving like 8% growth. So just doing everything they wanted to, they can get 4% growth, just like, doing things. They have pricing power, so they can also increase pricing by up to 4% to get growth. But the question is, how do we get to 13% growth? So how do you go from 8 to 13? There is a lift there, right? So demand management, there's a lift there of 2%. We could be more competitive with dynamic pricing, so that's an additional 3%. And then we found that, okay, if we focus on demand management, there was like $50 million potential of new revenue. So this is kind of tracking back from value to actually getting some hard dollar amounts and making decisions, right? Because we can also focus on labor to improve profitability. But this goes to really trying to solve problems and actually focus on demand management. And there's different opportunities. We have dollar signs, and there's actual value. So like I said, you had a question? Was that? No, go ahead.
Well, are you going to cover more about what kinds of data you were kind of pulling together, or your approaches, how you got to this? Or you want to talk about that?
So that was more of a, I can talk to that now. So this was kind of put together over a sequence of 3 or 4 months. It was more of a kind of ad hoc data perspective because we weren't putting too much energy behind it. We had to figure out what we're going to do. So once we got approval on the strategy, then we're going to do data projects and actually spend more effort into it. This was more of a series of like conversations over 3 months to actually pull data. So talking to business leaders, talking to our CFO to figure out like what are the different problems. So that's another good point around just, do you put the full strength of the data team behind this, or does let's just do some discovery first to figure out the opportunities? Because you can have 10 different opportunities, and you really want to figure out what's the best bang for your buck. So this is more so like a ad hoc way of like pulling data from different systems, not like a full kind of coherent like full data project, more of a discovery type of thing.
You and I clearly have different notions on data projects then,
Yeah.
That's cool. So basically just a little POC for each.
Correct. Yeah, it's a data project. It's like more of a POC. I was thinking more like getting data engineers, getting BAs, like the full strength of the team versus like, these are like more POC data projects to pull that.
That's good. Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question though. Here's another example of a strategy I put together, like a very simple template of kind of starting at the top level around, okay, what is the mission and values of the organization? Like how does the data team potentially help the organization and what we're trying to solve. So here's a template around, okay, let's list out what are those top 3 problems that we're trying to solve using data. It could be pricing inefficiency, labor challenges, supply chain shortages, different problems. And then what are we going to do? So we're going to embed data into the value stream and the business operating model. Perfect. What are we doing? So we could be introducing reporting to our supply chain team. We could be giving it to line leaders or field leaders, like very specifically around what the problems we're trying to solve and what we're going to do. We have different pillars, right? I mean, it could be people, process, technology, or data. So introducing data. We're trying to improve some of our data technology or platforms. It could be our processes of how we deliver data, because sometimes we can find data and find processes we don't have the right or processes, the right people. So it could be org change, where we're going to switch around how the data team is structured. So all these different types of pillars that we can leverage on our team. So really trying to make it simple, even a one-pager, because I don't know if you guys have presented to like your executive team, but really if you're presenting to your executive team, you probably have about 3 slides and like maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So if you can't get it in one page, 3 at the most, then you have a real problem in your hands. You don't get like 20 minutes and 30 minutes. You have one slide to say, here's what's important to you guys. Here's the problems I've found. Here's what we're going to do. And you stop talking and let them say yes or no. Or they just say thank you, and that's their way of saying thumbs up, we approve of that. So keeping it very simple, I think, is very important, because I've seen 100-page strategy decks. Those usually are not great because no one ever reads them. It's usually a consultant came in and built those and no one ever implemented it, because how do you read a 100-page slide deck? But really just having a one-pager and be able to simply talk about our strategy and connect it to the business around what business problems we're trying to solve, I found is very effective. This is another one that I put together, is kind of going the top-down approach of, hey, we want to achieve top-line growth. So business value is we want to achieve 12% top line growth. Based on that, we have 3 or 4 different initiatives. So taking Nike as an example, we're going to increase traffic on our mobile apps. Great. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use data to identify new customer segments. We're going to measure our marketing efficiency. So those are different types of data projects we can do to address a problem of we're seeing less people on our mobile apps. Another one is expansion of the bottom line. So how do you think about inventory? So we're going to reduce our inventory because it's a huge cost keeping so much inventory in our warehouses. So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate our days on hand, so how long it takes us to kind of move through all our inventory. We're going to integrate data into our optimization processes. So another example of kind of how do we talk about what we're doing, but it should still be under the umbrella of how we're providing value. So it's not just we're going to work on customer segments. We're doing that so we can increase traffic on our mobile apps, which means that we can drive more growth on the revenue. So that's really what our CEO cares about is top line growth, and we're trying to connect what we're doing to what the organization cares about. So just want to show a couple of different examples around just different templates or different ways you can talk about strategy, but really it's still trying to map what you're doing to what the organization cares about. And then quick thought about governance, because I know that it's also important to talk about governance. So these are a couple examples. Governance is even harder to define than data strategy. I mean, if you ask like 10 people about, if you ask 5 people about governance, they'll probably give you 10 different answers. So key things I've seen here is the words formal and like management and data. So you're trying to formalize how we manage data. I've been in different governance jobs. I've been brought in. Usually you put in data governance when you have so many problems that people complain about, and it's like we need to get data governance. Very rarely do you actually put in governance ahead of time. It's usually put in after the fact because you've had years of crappy processes and things failing. That's like, oh, we need governance around this because we realize that we need governance because everything's failing. And we have a huge amount of problems with people complaining about it. So still governance should still achieve one of those bottom 3. So additional problems we've seen is that people put in governance for the sake of governance. So we put in governance to solve problems that no one really thinks are problems. We just kind of have this advisory board, data governance boards, like 20 different boards, but we can't at all connect it to the bottom. We just know that these people exist and they do some stuff and they ask for our head count, but we have no connection to the bottom line. This is an interesting example from Ford. It's not necessarily governance, but I'm kind of map around how we think about governance. So Ford this was Ford's last quarterly earnings statement. So the interesting thing here is when you see here, Jim Farley talks about leaving $2 billion of profit on the table due to cost and supply chain issues. So they're putting dollar signs next to their different challenges. So that's a huge opportunity of us in the data space to say, okay, if the organization can put a dollar sign to cost or quality issues, it's a huge opportunity for us to say, if we went in there and solved these problems for you, can we tie back to some kind of savings to actually show the dollar sign? Because when we talk about value, usually people talk about value in dollar signs. If you work for a for-profit organization, it's going to be dollar signs at some point. So increased profit, revenue, expense. Nonprofits have a little bit of different ways they measure value, but for-profits, you're talking a lot about dollar signs. So really, what Ford did was kind of put a huge target to say, hey, we have $2 billion we're trying to achieve in savings. Anyone who can kind of get us to reduce that number is going to have a very nice career at Ford if you can help them with that problem. So this is one of those examples I put together around mapping governance to value. So if you look at the Ford example, map that back, right? So bad quality means broken vehicles. So you have to take your car in the shop. Take your car in the shop, they do a warranty repair. The shop does a warranty repair. They get a reimbursement, so the dealership makes the repair, and they send that back to Ford and say, it cost me $100, you guys are gonna reimburse us, which increases the higher cost. When we talk about $2 billion, that $2 billion of cost that Ford talked about essentially mapped back to some type of bad quality at the plant, at a supplier, or someone like that had a bad quality. So how do we think about data governance? Exact same thing. So we think about governance, bad data quality, broken processes that leads to higher costs and reduced profit. So our ability to map governance to value is a similar thing where we need governance to fix the bad quality problems that reduces our costs or increases our revenue. And I think that's the problem that we have is that even the governance space that I've seen that we don't really map the governance we're doing to value, which can be tricky to do, but it's really just questions, right? It's saying, okay, if I fix this problem for you and we introduce governance, how is this going to help the business? They'll probably tell you and say, well, it's going to help us by we can ship more orders, we'll have less chargebacks, we're going to have less costs. Like, that's the stuff that we should be writing down and presenting and say, hey, this is the value that we're providing as an organization. So similar to the strategy, I think there's some very direct paths to governance around how we map back to the business from a value perspective. So how do we think about this? So other uncomfortable truth. At the end of the day, the business does not care about the stuff that we think is important. Like I said, they care about value, they care about revenue, they care about their customer experience, but when they don't want to, unless you talk with the actual, some of your stakeholders, a lot of the businesses don't know what Power BI is, they don't care. They don't know what machine learning is, they don't know what lake houses are, they don't know what SQL are. They know that they're a means to an end. They know that data is going to help them move more product, sell more services, or do X, Y, and Z. The ins and outs of it, yes, we should all care about it, but we need to recognize that when we talk with the business, they don't care. So our ability to translate and talk about business literacy is our ability to say, okay, how do I translate and communicate the value that these things provide? So yes, Power BI, Lakehouse, machine learning, cloud, they're all important, but we have to communicate why the business should care about this. You should care about this because this new Lakehouse environment is going to make sure that we can do real-time decision-making, which means that we can solve issues right up front. Like, that's the conversation. But in many cases, we just talk about, hey, we have this new environment we're trying to build, and that's it. Like, that's the missing gap around the match from strategy to values, that we have to talk in terms of value. These new systems are going to allow us to recoup X amount of savings, or we're going to recoup this amount of inventory, or recoup this amount of revenue. So these are those uncomfortable truths that we have to think differently about how we communicate with our stakeholders, because that's what's holding us back, is that we think this is important. Well, this is important, but what's important is the business outcomes that keep us all employed at our different companies. Another idea is kind of thinking about where to start. So starting to wrap this up. So if you're sitting kind of right now, where do you start is, like, what are the current problems we're trying to solve? So right now, day to day, we're solving problems. So identify the current problems that we're solving and who we're solving them for. So I could be working on a process issue for marketing, something for finance, accounting. Think about what we're trying to solve for. And as for the meeting, I mean, the business is willing to talk about this as long as we're trying to help them. So once we understand the problems we're having, it should be a sequence of conversations. So asking for a meeting, let's talk about what we're trying to solve, why we're trying to solve it, to start to piece together a strategy on a data side or a governance perspective. And then you just listen. So listen to what they say, understand it, and play back in their language. So you say, what I heard from you is that, if we were to solve this, this issue with our ordering system, we would be able to reduce cancellations, would then allow us to reduce the amount of chargebacks or refunds or returns. That's going to help us from a revenue perspective. So really just saying, I'm going to listen, I'm going to ask you questions, I'm going to write them down and listen to you. I'm going to play back exactly what you just said, and that helps to form the strategy. So like, instead of us talking about solutions and data and modern data stack and data contracts, like, we're just going to talk in their language. And then once we're done with that, we take that back to our teams and talk about, okay, how do we translate that back to data? So we can do this data set, we can do this thing, but really when we're trying to connect it to the business, it's just identifying the problems, talking to our stakeholders, and making sure that we're partners and communicating in their language. Next steps. So like I said, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I talk about this stuff daily, so I write content daily talking about strategy, leadership, execution, all this stuff I talk about, and just kind of big things. So be curious. So a lot of this is curiosity. I mean, a lot of our employers won't ask us to do this. This is stuff that I found out on my own, for my own curiosity. So being curious, get ready to talk to people. So if you don't feel comfortable talking with people, talking about strategy and values can be difficult, because this is a people-intense business. Like, you can't really, you can try to pull strategy out of data, but it's very difficult without talking to people. So being ready to talk to a lot of people frequently. Figure out what people care about. So what's important to them? How are they incentivized? So if their performance review is based off of growth in that channel, they're probably only going to talk to you about the growth in the channel that's going to affect their performance review. So following back to the money. Learn your business. So how does your business make money? How do they create value? And what's their operating model? Keep it stupidly simple. Like I said, with the kind of the strategies, 1-pagers, maybe 2 pages, but keep the strategy crazy simple. Even governance, like, Governance should also be crazy simple where you can map it back easily to what you're trying to solve, and then rinse and repeat. Like, this is a repeated thing. Like, one of those slides I've shown, that was a 3 or 4 month process of talking with people. So this is not a one-timer. This is part of our jobs, is like having more conversations and talking a lot more frequently about these concepts. So kind of like, this is kind of what I see as our ability to kind of increase our ability to be strategic partners, talk more about value, and connect with our business. Any questions? I know that's a lot. Any questions about any of this? Not sure if some of this you guys have thought about, or maybe some of this is kind of a new type of a way to think about it, but kind of just some ideas that I have. Yep.
So have you guys talked about any sort of business data ownership or anything like that?
So question about business data ownership. I would say ownership is always tough because the business, in my experience, the business doesn't really want to own any of this stuff. They don't understand what ownership means. They don't understand how the data is being used. So I think that some of the language has to change from ownership to like they're business stewards, they're part of it, but you really have to figure out you have to follow the process back to who is executing the process, but you have to, I think changing the conversation around ownership is a big part of that, because business doesn't want to be owners.
Process ownership resonates more with you than maybe that data ownership.
Yeah, I think it's more of a process where this person does the process, so they're a process owner. But if you say day owner, they really pull back and say, I don't want to be a day owner. Because also, that's also our fault, because once we pull the data, we don't tell people what we do with it. We just kind of do with it what we please. But we don't say, okay, we're going to do this with the data, and we're going to push to these people. We just say, thank you for the data. We're going to go off of here. But if we increase our communication, we can do better at that. But I would say much more process ownership, because I've rarely met a business person that wants to be a data owner. Anything else? What's that?
How's your daughter?
She's great now, except when she brought lice to our house in the fall of last year. That was terrible, the lice situation. She has nice long curly hair, so it was a lice stream. So that was a fun one. Yep.
Do you have people, or what do you suggest for, obviously this event's great for that. Obviously.
Flick it up.
Obviously this event is great for networking, but
Yeah.
You have questions and this gets you excited and you're getting traction. Do you have any ideas other than reaching out to you on LinkedIn is a great one, but where do people go to continue to have that collaboration, that figuring things out, and you're in the trenches and trying to next steps? And
Yeah, it's a great question, just because I found the same thing. I mean, for me, LinkedIn has been huge just because I found other people talking about this similarly. So I think that, the LinkedIn community is great. I know there's a lot of newsletters out there that are also talking about this. I think in your business, you kind of have to find those different, or maybe you put together a group that can talk about this stuff, because the challenge is very siloed. So I find that usually it's the data group that has to connect all these things together, unfortunately. So I think it's just that, it's just finding the group and just kind of asking people, hey, would you mind being part of this group that we talk about this stuff monthly, or teams, having teams chats about this. But I think it's just got to try different things to figure out where and a lot of this is community-based. You have to find your communities and say, I'm struggling with this. What are you guys doing in this space? But I found that for me, LinkedIn has been pretty huge, just because there's a lot of people talking about this stuff on LinkedIn. I found just more and more and more people are coming out of the trenches and talking about these concepts. So sorry, it's not a great answer. Anything else? No, it's a lot after lunch, I know. All right, thank you. Like I said, you can, if you got any questions, if you want to get a copy of this, I think they have all the presenter slides. If not, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can share this with anyone who's curious to seeing some of those templates. So, thank you.